Tom Riddle, his first year in Hogwarts. Chapter 2. Abraxas Malfoy. Tom stood in the centre of the Great Hall of Hogwarts, surrounded by other wide-eyed first-year students. The vast room hummed with the buzz of excited whispers and the clatter of silverware. The ceiling above was a swirling canvas of stars, twinkling like distant memories of another world. He couldn't help but marvel at the grandeur of the place. High, arched windows lined the stone walls, casting beams of golden light onto the polished wooden floor. The air was heavy with the aroma of delicious food, making his stomach growl impatiently. His gaze swept over the long tables lining the sides of the hall, each adorned with banners in different colours. The older students seated there watched the newcomers with a mix of curiosity and amusement. He knew they were sorting them into their respective houses, as Albus had explained on the journey to Hogwarts. The memory of his journey with Albus Dumbledore still felt like a dream. The gentle giant of a man had appeared at the orphanage as if by magic, offering him a chance to escape the drudgery of his life and discover the secrets of his hidden power. He recalled the conversation they had shared about muggles, a term he had never heard before. Albus had explained that muggles were ordinary people, unaware of the magical world that existed alongside their own. Tom had realized then that he was a muggle-born wizard, just like some of the other students around him. He could spot the other muggle-borns easily, by the looks of wonderment and confusion on their faces. They were all here now, brought together by the same unseen force that had guided them to this place. As he stood there, waiting for whatever ceremony was to come next, Tom couldn't help but feel a sense of belonging for the first time in his life. Despite the hunger gnawing at his stomach, he knew that this was where he was meant to be. He glanced around at the other students, wondering what kinds of powers they might possess. He thought about the strange incidents in his own past, the moments when he had unintentionally caused objects to move or fires to erupt. The power within him was wild and unpredictable, but Albus had promised him that he would learn to control it at Hogwarts. Headmaster Dippet cleared his throat, and a hush fell over the Great Hall. Dippet, a man of round features and a fussy air, took the stage. "Welcome, students, both old and new, to another year at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry." His voice echoed through the hall, laced with a hint of formality. He launched into a lengthy speech about school rules and decorum. Tom tried to focus, but his mind drifted. He surveyed the hall, noticing a boy near the front. Pale blonde hair, impeccably tailored robes, and an air of casual boredom. Tom's gaze met the boy's. A flicker of something, recognition maybe, or simply shared observation, passed between them. The boy offered a slight nod, a subtle acknowledgement. Tom returned it. Dippet droned on about curfews and acceptable wand movements. As the headmaster spoke, the blonde boy, the one that Tom had shared glances with, moved towards him. He approached, a smirk playing on his lips. "Abraxas Malfoy." The boy introduced himself, his tone smooth and cutting. "I couldn't help but notice your complexion. Are you feeling unwell?" His eyes glinted with amusement. Tom's jaw tightened slightly. He refused to give the boy the satisfaction of seeing him ruffled. "I am perfectly fine." Abraxas's smile widened. "Such a pale countenance. I suppose it's to be expected of of someone new to our world." Tom didn't respond. He merely studied Abraxas, trying to gauge his intention. The boy's words dripped with condescension, and his gaze carried a superior edge to it. There was something in the way Abraxas looked at him that made Tom uneasy. Albus Dumbledore held the sorting hat, a tattered, conical hat that looked far too old to speak. The hat sat perched on the edge of the stool, seeming to regard the assembled students with a knowing air. Dippet finished his speech and gestured towards Dumbledore. "Now let the sorting commence," Dumbledore announced, his voice carrying easily across the vast hall. A hush fell over the students. One by one, their names were called, and they nervously approached the stool. Tom watched, his gaze unwavering, as the hat was placed on the first student's head. "Hufflepuff," the hat declared, its voice booming without any visible movement. The student, relieved, hurried to the table draped in yellow, where cheers erupted. Several others were sorted. Gryffindor and Ravenclaw each gaining new members. Then it was Abraxas Malfoy's turn. He strode forward, his posture perfect, a picture of serene confidence. The hat settled on his head, and there was a moment of silence. Then, with startling speed, the hat shouted, "Slytherin!" Abraxas's lips curved into a subtle smile. He swept towards the table adorned with green and silver, where other students in similar robes applauded. His eyes met Tom's for a fleeting second, a look of mild interest crossing his face. Tom focused back on the sorting. He would not join them. "Thomas Riddle," Dumbledore called, and Tom felt a jolt of surprised apprehension. He straightened, resisting the urge to fidget, and walked towards the stool with steady steps. He kept his face neutral, betraying none of his inner turmoil. He could feel the eyes of the entire hall upon him. "Do not show fear." Dumbledore offered a warm smile, and Tom merely nodded in acknowledgement. He sat, and the cool weight of the sorting hat settled on his head, obscuring the light. A voice whispered in his mind, and Tom was caught off guard. "Interesting. Very interesting. Where to put you? Ambitious, I see. A thirst for knowledge too. Ravenclaw would suit you well. But power. You crave power, don't you? The ability to control, to influence, to have." The hat seemed to linger on each thought, assessing him. "Slytherin could help you with that. Yes. It has the right drive, yes." Tom remained still and silent, not daring to influence the hat's decision. He did not wish to show weakness. "Slytherin," the hat proclaimed, its voice echoing in the hall. Tom stood, a small, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. He walked towards the Slytherin table. As he passed the other students, he caught Abraxas Malfoy's eye. Abraxas's expression was unreadable, but Tom knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his gut, that he had acquired a new enemy. The Charms classroom was a kaleidoscope of colours and motion. Professor Alara Meadowsweet, a flurry of bright robes, flitted between students, her voice a chime of encouragement. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, illuminating floating feathers and the excited faces of first-year students. Tom stood at his desk, wand held carefully, the feather from his quill resting on the surface. He listened intently as Professor Meadowsweet demonstrated the levitation charm. "Wingardium Leviosa," she said, her wand arcing gracefully as a small, enchanted flower floated effortlessly into the air. "Remember the wing, the lightness of the movement, and the focused intent." Tom took a deep breath, mimicking her wand movement. "Wingardium Leviosa," he murmured, focusing all his attention on the feather. The tip of his wand glowed, and the feather twitched. "Excellent, Mr. Riddle," Professor Meadowsweet called, her smile as warm as the sunlight. "You have a natural aptitude for charms." Tom's chest swelled with a small note of pride. He glanced sideways and saw Abraxas Malfoy watching him, a flicker of something that looked like envy passing over the other boy's face. It vanished so quickly, Tom almost dismissed it. He focused again on the feather, determined to master the charm. He performed the incantation, his articulation precise. This time, the feather lifted a few inches off the desk, hovering for a moment before gently drifting back down. "Better." Alara moved closer to him. "Concentrate on the lightness, the feeling of the feather rising. Imagine it floating." The Hufflepuff student next to Tom, a rosy-cheeked boy named Herbert, accidentally bumped Tom's desk. The sudden movement disrupted Tom's focus, and his feather, which was lifting, took off. It spun wildly, then shot across the room, landing on the head of a startled Ravenclaw girl. Tom frowned. Herbert mumbled an apology. Tom ignored him. He gathered his concentration. This time, the incantation worked. The feather lifted. Again, a Hufflepuff boy, this time a clumsy girl, accidentally nudged the desk this time. The feather soared away a third time. Tom's lips thinned. Alara, oblivious to the brewing storm, bustled towards a small room at the back of the classroom, muttering about needing to replenish her supply of enchanted feathers. Tom remained at the desk, simmering. He recalled a spell he'd read about in the library, a disarming charm, and how it could be twisted into something more powerful. A depulso, a spell to repel objects, those clumsy Hufflepuffs distracting him, ruining his focus. The feather's trajectory, its chaotic flight, had all been their fault. He raised his wand, pointed it at Herbert. "Depulso!" he hissed. A jet of invisible force slammed into Herbert. The boy yelped, flying backward, his chair overturning as he crashed into the wall at the back of the classroom. Books and quills scattered. A collective gasp rippled through the room. The Slytherins erupted in cheers. Abraxas Malfoy, a smirk playing on his lips, clapped, his eyes gleaming with approval. Tom felt a surge of grim satisfaction. He quickly lowered his wand, feigning innocence. Just then, Alara returned, her face a mixture of confusion and concern. She surveyed the scene. Herbert sprawled on the floor, the classroom in disarray. "What in Merlin's name happened here?" she asked, her voice sharper than usual. Tom stepped forward, affecting an expression of sincere apology. "It was an accident, Professor. I was practicing the levitation charm, and the feather went wild. Poor Herbert was simply in its path." "Are you quite sure, Mr. Riddle?" Alara's eyes scanned the room, lingering on Abraxas, who quickly composed himself. She sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. "Well, someone help Herbert. Mr. Riddle, focus on your charms. Accidents happen." She turned and began to straighten the disarray. The bell rang, signaling the end of charms class. Tom gathered his things, trying to appear nonchalant, despite the adrenaline coursing through him. As he stepped into the corridor, a hand fell on his shoulder. "Impressive work in there, Riddle," Abraxas Malfoy said, his voice a low murmur. He leaned in close, his pale blue eyes assessing. "That depulso was quite a feat for a first year. Most of us struggled to keep things off the floor." Tom shrugged, attempting to appear unassuming. "It was an accident, really. I was just trying to focus on the levitation charm." Abraxas chuckled, a dry, brittle sound. "Of course, an accident. Just as I'm sure Professor Meadowsweet is oblivious to what truly happened." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the hallway, now filling with students from other classrooms. "Though perhaps a bit less dramatic next time. Discretion is key, wouldn't you agree? Especially in this place." Tom met Abraxas's gaze, trying to gauge his sincerity. Malfoy, with his perfect hair and tailored robes, was an enigma. He spoke of secrets, of hidden currents. "Those Hufflepuffs," Abraxas continued, a note of disdain creeping into his voice. "Clumsy, aren't they? Not the sort you'd want to be associated with." He pulled a face of distaste. "Fortunately, we are not in Hufflepuff." He smiled thinly. "Remember, Riddle, we operate on a different level here." The door of Tom's room swung open, revealing Abraxas Malfoy, a trunk levitating in his wake. He guided it through the doorway with a flick of the wrist, the movement practiced and casual. "Room for one more, Riddle?" Abraxas asked, his voice smooth, a predatory smile playing about his lips. Tom gestured towards the empty bed opposite his, a question in his eyes. "Aren't you staying with your friends?" he inquired, the words carefully chosen. Tom knew the other Slytherins, the ones with names like Lestrange and Rosier, the names that whispered of ancient lines and darker leanings. Abraxas lowered himself onto the bed with a languid grace, his back straight, his tailored robes immaculate. He opened the trunk with a subtle wave of his wand, revealing an interior lined with silk. He began unpacking, each item placed with precision, ignoring Tom's question. "Shouldn't you be thrilled, Riddle?" Abraxas finally offered, his tone laced with an undercurrent Tom did not miss, a challenge. "I have decided to grace you with my presence." He paused, straightening a perfectly folded shirt. "Think of it, sharing a room with a proper wizard." There was a deliberate emphasis on the word proper, and Tom knew the jab was aimed at him. Despite what his parents may have been, Tom's own lineage was a mystery. It was a veiled insult, a way to remind him of his uncertain origins. "I am here to elevate you," Abraxas added, his eyes glinting with amusement. Tom continued neatly stacking his robes, each fold precise and economical, as if every action was a strategic maneuver. He felt Abraxas's gaze on him, a scrutiny that bordered on the unsettling. The luxurious scent of Abraxas's trunk, a concoction of expensive soaps and imported lavender, filled the small space, clashing with the more utilitarian aroma of Tom's belongings. Finally, Tom turned, meeting Abraxas's appraising stare. "Why are you watching me?" he asked, his voice even. He knew he projected an image of cool control, an icy facade that concealed the churning thoughts beneath. Abraxas blinked, momentarily thrown off. You are folding your robes, without magic," he stammered, the aristocratic composure momentarily wavering. His expression was a mixture of confusion and faint disgust. A flicker of amusement danced within Tom, but he quickly suppressed it. "And?" he asked, his tone still carefully neutral. "I have never seen anyone do that," Abraxas admitted, as if it were a personal affront. "It is inefficient." Tom raised an eyebrow, feigning curiosity. "Then teach me to do it magically," he suggested, his eyes narrowing slightly. He wanted to see how Abraxas would react to that. Abraxas visibly recoiled, a flush creeping up his pale neck. He stammered, I have never done it myself." He quickly recovered his poise, his voice regaining its usual smooth cadence. "House elves handle such mundane tasks in my household. It is beneath me." The words were delivered with a haughty air, but a subtle tremor betrayed his discomfort. Tom tilted his head, a small, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. "Fascinating," he murmured, his eyes gleaming with a spark of something Abraxas couldn't quite decipher. "Perhaps, then, we are both lacking." He let the words hang in the air, savoring the subtle shift in Abraxas's expression. "Lacking?" Abraxas scoffed, his perfect facade momentarily cracking. "I assure you, Riddle, I am anything but lacking." "Are you quite sure?" Tom countered, his voice soft but laced with a hint of challenge. "Because wouldn't it be efficient to know how to fold clothes, considering the circumstances?" He gestured around the room, toward their unadorned space, a stark contrast to the opulence Abraxas was accustomed to. "Professor Meadowsweet doesn't seem to teach household magic." Abraxas's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, the color draining from his face. He seemed to be wrestling internally, the carefully constructed image of superiority momentarily under siege. Finally, he conceded with a reluctant sigh. "Very well," he said, his tone clipped. "Show me." Tom calmly retrieved a robe from his trunk, demonstrating the precise movements, the careful alignment of seams, the economical use of space. He spoke, explaining the process as he did it. No magic was needed. He made it seem routine, simple. It was about neatness, structure, precision. Abraxas, watching with a mixture of disdain and reluctant curiosity, attempted to mimic the process. His efforts, however, were comically inept. He fumbled with the fabric, his fingers clumsy, his face contorted in concentration. The robe became a crumpled mess. He tried again, with similar results, and his face turned red. The absurdity of the situation, the utter failure of the heir to an ancient wizarding family to perform such a basic task, was suddenly overwhelming. A genuine laugh escaped Tom, a rare and surprising sound. And then, to his astonishment, Abraxas began to laugh as well, a genuine, uninhibited chuckle that transformed his usually aloof features.